evening, everyone. Welcome to our very first session. I'm very excited for Learning with My Rabbis. Our new weekly video series will feature myself and different rabbis and teachers of mine, people that have greatly impacted my own thinking that I've gotten to learn with personally, and getting to share a little bit of their Torah and their teachings with all of you. So I'm very excited. Our first guest is a very special guest, someone that I've gotten the pleasure of learning with for a long time, the Dean of the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies and one of the Vice Presidents of the American Jewish University, Rabbi Dr. Bradley Shavit Artson. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Rabbi. Thank you so much.
Lovely to be with you and good to see you.
So I thought, just given everything, we would dive kind of right into the topic on everyone's mind. Going on right now with the COVID virus, what is it that we can really take from our tradition? How can our tradition be helping us right now in this time of crisis just around the world?
So, we are all struggling throughout the world with this challenge and with sheltering in place, those of us who have that luxury, and with trying to support those who are frail or vulnerable, and to help those who are grieving to be able to grieve. I think the Jewish tradition offers us a couple big touch points. The first is, frankly, from the history of the Jewish people, we've been through worse. We have put up with a lot of suffering, and what it has taught us is both patience and resilience, that you never give up on hope, that there will be a tomorrow at the end of this, and that we can make it. So I take from the story of Jewish strength that we should not despair and we should not feel trapped in the present, but be able to work towards a future that's reflective of the choices we make now. Second, I think of Shabbat. And in a sense, this is an invitation to a kind of global Shabbat in which all of us put our cars aside and rest at home. Some of the reactions to the world have been amazing. Here in Los Angeles, the skies are crystal blue and you can see the mountains in a way that I don't ever recall being true. I know that around the world, wild animals are coming back out into the streets in ways that are extraordinary. There was a hole in the ozone that closed up last week. So partly the wisdom of Judaism is that in times where your frenetic activity isn't productive, have the ability to stop and do nothing and realize how productive that can be. And so if we think of this as a kind of global Shabbat, this is a chance for each of us to take a pause, take a breath, not in passive surrender, but with a sense of gifting ourselves this time, and in this moment, gifting each other the ability to stay healthy as well. And then the third thing that I would offer is that Judaism is about shaping a better future. We do that through learning, we do that through study, we do that through observance, and this is a period where we're invited to think about what's no longer working, what can we change, and what can we prepare now so that when this is over, we will emerge resplendent. And that, I think, is an invitation to each of us to try to imagine that better world and start building it now.
So it's great talking about the future and what we might be able to imagine. I know for a lot of my congregants, and even myself, that's an area that makes me quite nervous, is the unknown, what the future might hold. Do you have any ideas on your own? Nothing for certain, none of us know, but what do you see the impact of this virus on the Jewish landscape, on the conservative rabbinate, conservative synagogues?
So let me start a little bigger, Rabbi Sachs, if I could. I think part of what this has shown is that we are all of us connected to everybody. A little tiny mishap in a distant province in the corner of the world, a place none of us had heard of before this, and it sets the entire world on its heels. So the illusion that we're all made up of discrete, separate entities that have our own, I'll just take care of myself, that illusion has been busted forever. We are one planet. We are one living organism. We are connected each to all. And what happens to one of us happens in some ways to every one of us. So we need to be fashioning a civilization that starts with that kind of cosmic consciousness. And we need to tool Judaism to remind us not only of our beautiful distinctiveness, but also our shared humanity. And that these are not opposites one another, they actually complement and build towards something grand together. So if we do that, if we take that in mind, then I think what for me emerges from this is the reality, first of all, that the people who we think of as essential are not necessarily the ones who are most well compensated or the most publicly lauded. And so there's a serious gap between those who keep us alive and those who we praise and elevate. That needs to change. We need to really hunker down on the ancient Jewish wisdom that the person who builds a family is changing tomorrow. The person who teaches a single child, who cares for the elderly, that person is channeling God's light in a way far more than someone famous or glorious or lauded. And we need to correct the social imbalance to honor the people who we find out are actually essential, not just the ones who make it into People magazine. And then along with that, we've discovered that we're capable of being inclusive in ways that we had never thought possible. So I'm struck by how many congregations, and this isn't a simple matter for reasons of Jewish law, so I don't mean to preach to what your synagogue could or should be doing, but many, many conservative rabbis who normally would not are now using electronics to find ways to reach their communities. Some are doing it during the week with a bevy of online classes and spiritual sessions and worship and meditation. Some have gone further and are now broadcasting Shabbat services, either doing it right before Shabbat on Friday night, but many of them are now moving into actually producing Shabbat services that people can tap into. And the response of the Jewish world has been amazing. Much larger numbers of people coming to services now electronically than were coming into the sanctuaries. Now, part of that is the alarm with the COVID virus and needing to connect in a more affirmative way. But part of it is we never made the effort to include people who couldn't make it into the buildings. We treated it like it was their problem, or we didn't have any agency to do anything about it. Came the COVID, and we suddenly realized, no, we actually can make choices here. And I think what's going to change is that after this is over, and it will end, and we will go back to our lives together, and I, for one, can't wait. There is no conceivable world in which the electronic connections will substitute for real human connections. But now that we know all these people who want to be connected, and many of them no longer live nearby, but they're able to Zoom in, I don't think there's any way afterwards to go totally back and to forget what we now know. All the people who want to be part of our communities, but who need the electronic help to be able to do that. The shut-ins, the people who are struggling with illness, the people who are taking care of sick or infirm people who need their attention. So they can't take the time to come to the class or come to the service, but they very much want to be able to plug into it. So reaching out and using the technology we have, not as a driving force, but as a gift, an opportunity for expansiveness, that I think is going to change the future in significant ways, all to the good.
I definitely agree, and it's been a great experience here at Beth Tikvah, seeing everybody come out digitally, finding opportunities for us to come together, to learn together, to pray together. And we definitely plan that many of those will continue in different formats once we're able to resume programming in the building. But on the flip side of that, there's been a sense I've noticed for some congregants of, on the one hand, opportunity. They don't have to attend Beth Tikvah. They can go to any synagogue in North America or even the world.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I do, on the one hand, see a negative side when, for example, we aren't at the point where we're comfortable saying Kaddish without a minyan physically present. So congregants who might disagree with their rabbi just go to a different synagogue. And there's already the widening, I think, chasm in different observance in the conservative movement. And in a way, I feel like it's been broadened even more.
Right. So here, I guess, is the challenge and the opportunity. First, I have to break some bad news to you, Rabbi.
Please.
They were doing that beforehand.
But they kept it to themselves. They didn't tell me.
People who don't agree with their rabbis were just opting out. That's been going on for a long time.
There was a geographical location of how far they could get away from us.
I understand. So they were prisoners of how far they could go. But I guess what I want to ask you is there a way to reconstrue that instead of as a negative, as a positive? Right? In theory, the observance that any particular shul offers always is a combination of choices, advantages and challenges, everyone. So you're not going to appeal to everybody. And the idea that you own the people who are within a particular radius, I don't think that should be true. Like, we should earn their loyalty and participation. And if they don't feel at home with what we're offering, that doesn't mean we should stop offering it, because there are obviously people who do want exactly what you're offering. But for those who don't, it's great that they can find an alternative that gives them what they want. And it may mean that they go to your shul for particular things, and then they go to other shuls for other things. It may mean that at some point they find themselves so much at home in the other place that they stop coming to yours. That's true. But it will also work in the other direction. There will be people who will appreciate the integrity and the contours of what you're offering, and then they will come to that. So I guess I think it's always better for people to be where they're happy and not for them to be kidnapped because of a lack of alternatives. The challenge here is we're offering Judaism in the guise of freedom, right? There's all kinds of ways to be Jewish. Pick the kind that speaks to you most. And part of what may shift is the idea that you're a member of a particular synagogue only. I'm a member of several different congregations. And of late, one of the things that I've honestly enjoyed, I love classical cantorial music. And that's a unique species, those of us who still love that organ-based, choir-based music. There are some places, there's a Reform congregation in Berlin that puts its Shabbat services online, and the music is sublime, and it's great. And I don't do that because I don't love the congregation that I'm a member of. I do, and I'm very loyal to my congregation. But I do go on Friday nights and listen to this magnificent Lewandowski, Sulzer music, because I don't get that normally. And I think that's all to the good. That's just a spiritual resource in my handbag.
So I agree. I think it's great people can find the place that connects to them. But what about on issues where a movement, the conservative movement, that already is fairly divided in practice? Growing up in Los Angeles, having moved to Toronto, I've seen that very firsthand, how different two conservative communities can look. With the virtual aspect, I see another change, a widening chasm in practice on the different ends of the conservative movement. What is it that still bridges and unites us then as a movement if it's not those types of halakhic practices?
So I need to back up to give you my answer to that. I, before this coronavirus, spent a good deal of time traveling throughout North America and even Israel and Europe, looking at different conservative and Masorti communities. And I'm always struck by how much they share in common, even when they think they're so different, right? The vast majority of the prayer service at your congregation would be the same service that's being offered in even Southern California, right? There might be some tweaks of differences. Do we use an instrument to play music or not? Do we use a microphone or not? What are the different gender roles and how do they manifest? There will be some tweaking of that. And then there'll be something more invisible, just a kind of small c conservatism or not. But what I see when I look at conservative shuls around the country and around the world is just how similar they are. The feeling is the same. We're still struggling, all of us, with how do you take a tradition you love and a modernity that you also love, and how do you keep them talking to each other so that your Judaism is based on truth and an open affirmation of what we know and a respect for scholarship and a love of Israel and the Hebrew language and a respect for mitzvah observance, regardless of how individuals practice it. I don't think that's going to change at all. And I don't think this is going to magnify the difference except in one area. There will be some rabbis who say, I'm not comfortable using electronics on Shabbat. And there'll be some rabbis who say, I am within these constraints. And then there'll be rabbis who say, I am regardless of constraints. That's going to be the difference. How new is that? We've always been a movement that's felt that our differences strengthen us because what we share is more essential. The notion that we are, in fact, conserving in the Canadian and Anglo sense, that we're conserving a beautiful heritage. And so we don't want to just be rummaging through it for pieces that we want to salvage. We want to keep the living organism healthy and strong, but living organisms are constantly retaining traits and shifting over time, both. And if Judaism is alive, then it has to do that too and see that as an affirmation of its traditionalism. So I'm not scared about that. I think we as a movement are in fact adapting beautifully to these changing times, which is why so many of the classes and the synagogue services that people are going to these days are conservative based.
Great. Going back a little bit to the idea of essential workers, what does it mean to say that coming together as a religious community physically isn't an essential practice?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Look, what we struggle with here, and I've been thinking about this from the beginning, human beings are mammals, and mammals need socializing. They've done enough experiments over the past 200 years. Baby monkeys that are raised with all the food they need, all the warmth they need, but no emotional connection, grow up to be monstrous, right? And that's true for baby people too. So our need to embrace each other and talk to each other and connect to each other and live in each other's company, this isn't a luxury. This is a fundamental piece of who we are. And at the same time, this virus is fatal. Already more people have died in the United States of the coronavirus than in the Vietnam War. So we're talking a large degree of fatality, and I don't think that's over yet. I think we're going to see more of that. So how we balance these two fundamental human realities, here too, I think Judaism has some wisdom to offer. Judaism says that when you have a choice between a general rule and a specific rule, the specific rule overrides because that's that moment, right? A holiday, for example, that comes more often takes precedence over one that comes less often. So Shabbat over Hanukkah. So I think the fact that people are dying of this virus, that for the moment takes precedence over our need to hug each other. But it can't forever. We have to be finding ways in the meantime to feel connected, even if we can't touch each other. And then we also have to be working towards getting us back together again. So for sure, as soon as it's possible to have services with each other, we need to be figuring out how to do that. But that's not going to come all at once. That will come in stages. And maybe we'll have services where all the clergy can be in the room together, and then they'll broadcast to everyone else. Or all the clergy, and then we can have 50 people scattered throughout the sanctuary. And then we can have 100, and then we can have 200. And we'll find ways to move back towards all being together, but it's not going to happen all at once. And that's proper, because this is life or death. And saving a life overrides those other concerns.
There's a debate we had here when this first started. We actually closed the synagogue before the provincial orders to do so. And our last Shabbat, we encouraged people to stay home. And we only had in the room maybe 25, 30 people. And we had opened it up like high holidays, space chairs 8 feet apart. So it was a very sparsely filled room. But there was a question of, what's the difference between saying to somebody, we don't think it's safe for you to come to shul, versus if we really believe it's not safe, saying to them, you're forbidden Jewishly. It's a sore for you to come to shul if you're somebody who's in a high-risk category, who's because of your age, because of medical reasons. How do you feel about that, telling somebody, not that they're exempt from their obligation, but when we start to reopen, saying to people, you might actually be forbidden halakhically from coming together? Or do you think it should be a person's choice if they're going to endanger themselves?
It depends on the person, and it depends on the rabbi, and it depends on your relationship to them. I don't think that issuing edicts that no one is going to listen to serves any purpose. So I don't think a broad halakhic declaration, don't start putting posters up throughout the city, making an abstract announcement. But the precedent I would go on is Yom Kippur. Someone whose medical condition requires them to eat is required according to Torah law to eat as well. You have to do Birkat HaMazon if you eat on Yom Kippur for medical necessity. In other words, it becomes a mitzvah to eat. And that's the way I would frame it. It's not just that they're forbidden from coming to shul if they ask. It's that they are obligated to maintain their own health. Their life is their gift to us. So what they're doing by sheltering is giving us the gift of their own life, and that is the act of obedience. The issue is not, are you in the room or not? The issue is, are you best fulfilling your mandate from God? And sometimes you best fulfill that mandate by showing up, and sometimes you best fulfill that mandate by staying home. And I would limit it, Rabbi Sachs, to the people who ask you the question, right? I don't give psak unless requested. That's to say, I don't make a Jewish ruling, a Jewish law, without being asked. So if someone asks me, then I would tell them, I would say, yes, in my understanding, you are forbidden to go to the synagogue until it's safe. But you need to know that in refraining from going to the synagogue, you're not only refraining from violating a commandment, you're affirmatively enacting one. And that is to maintain your health and the health of the people around you.
Great. I really like that language and that formation. We've been talking tangentially about the suffering this has caused people. Right? I've seen or heard from people who Holocaust survivors who died alone because their family couldn't be with them, people who missed their grandchildren's birth, people that just can't be together, that are suffering alone, grieving alone. Right? The suffering right now is really incredible.
Yeah.
And I know this is something you've written about and spoken about a lot, is the idea of a theodicy. How can a good, a loving, a powerful God be aware of suffering and let it happen. I was wondering if you could give us kind of a shorthand version of your own solution to that problem.
Sure. So look, the problem of why bad things happen is an acute problem for all people, atheists as well as religious, polytheists as well as monotheists. But it's particularly sharp for monotheists because we feel burdened to say that God is good and God is powerful and God is all-knowing all at once. And that means that whatever happens because God wants it to, and so it ought to be good. And then when something happens that at least appears to be really awful, that makes a crisis for our religiosity. For me, what doesn't make sense is the notion of a God who is all-powerful. Judaism has, for millennia, grieved when bad things happen, with a sense that it's not always divine will. Sometimes it's forces of evil that overwhelm in the short term. There's a statement in the Talmud that nature follows its own path. And I think that's tremendously wise, that if God creates the world, then the world gains some degree of self-determination. And that means that things happen not because God wants it to, but because that's just, in this case, what viruses do. Right? And we live in a world in which there are viruses because they've gained an evolutionary foothold. And that isn't a why is God doing this? The question I'd want to reframe is, where is God to be found in the midst of this? And I think that God is the force for all vitality. So all living things thinking to maintain their interiority and build on that, that is a place where God is found. But the virus attacking people and killing people, that's not because God wants to teach a lesson or God has specific individuals in mind who have consequences that need to be paid. I don't for a moment believe in that, and I don't think Judaism requires us to believe that either. I believe in a God who is at every moment inviting us to make optimal choices, and that God cannot and does not break natural law. So when something like this happens, God is working in us and with us and through us to bring healing, to restore safety, to make sure nobody is alone, to make sure that there's a minimal number of deaths and illnesses, to push resources into the medical and scientific community so they can do the research they need to do to figure out how to get us past that. That's where I look to for God's presence. And God doesn't disappoint me. I see God's hand all over the place now in the way people are rising up in acts of compassion and decency and courage to take care of each other and to make sure people don't feel alone. Look, I'm sure you've seen too, there are these remarkable videos now showing up on the internet. People who are standing out on their porches in Israel. They had people who were leading Shabbat services on their mirpeset, on their verandas, and a whole neighborhood singing, all socially distanced, but singing together. In Germany, a bunch of people took their musical instruments out on their porches, and they started playing Beethoven's Ode to Joy. You know, a kind of makeshift orchestra of people who just needed to make music together. That's where I see God. God is in the resilience of hope, in people coming together, and the fact that we are shifting the course of this virus. We already have, and God is giving us the power to keep to the course.
Great, thank you. I made a joke recently at a staff meeting that one of the results of the virus is that the most important person at every synagogue is no longer the rabbis or the executive director in the chazan. It's the person who does the newsletter and the social media, because we've switched. Our priorities have shifted drastically. One of the things I've been thinking about is that the problems facing us have instantly switched. What our priority is now this virus and online and all of that, versus 3 months ago, if you would have asked me the biggest problem facing Judaism, for me personally, I would have said anti-Semitism. Especially, I just saw that recently a new report came out in the States that there were more attacks this last year or more incidents of anti-Semitism than in the past 40 years. So my question is, what are we to do? Because these problems have gone from our attention, but they still exist, right? We still see it. It still exists. And where should our priorities be at this moment?
So part of being a living organism is that it's not based on a hierarchy. You can't make an argument that the liver is more important than the heart, or the heart is more important than the brain. They're all necessary for life. And so they all need to be doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's true for the Jewish community and for our civilization as well. We all have important things to be doing, none of which can be dropped. So I agree we need to be paying attention to anti-Semitism, although I don't think it's the most important issue. I think we
What for you is?
I don't know how to use that language. I can tell you what are among the most important issues, but I don't know how to have a single most important issue. I think that cultivating human thriving is always the most important rubric, but that includes a lot of things. So, anti-Semitism is bad, but so's racial hatred and bigotry. The number of violent incidents in the United States against African Americans, Latinos, women has also gone through the roof. I don't want to be in a competition for who's suffering more or whose suffering counts biggest. We need to attend to the human propensity to turn fear and vulnerability into rage and to bully. We need to help people be proud of who they are and to love themselves better. We need to help people with literacy and gaining life skills. As the economy changes, and this will accelerate that, people will find themselves lacking the skills to operate successfully in the new economy. We need to help train them and get them over and across so there aren't the has and the has-nots. I view the gulf between the wealthiest 1% and the everybody else is getting worse and worse, and it's deadly. So how we fight that, like these are all issues. And then, climate change hasn't gone away. We still need to try to make sure the earth remains a habitable place for mammals and particularly for primate mammals. And we're doing a terrible job of that. So all of these things require our attention. And I think one of the things I would urge us to do is not use the language of this is the biggest thing. They're all big things. And right now, on top of it all is people's sense of isolation and fear, people who are losing their jobs in droves, people whose income is either at risk or now gone. Like, we need to be addressing and mobilizing how to make sure people don't fall through the cracks, make sure that we're still attending to all of those human needs.
Great. So I don't mean to imply that I'm not capable of thinking of other concerns as well. I just know as a synagogue, right, security's been a major topic of discussion, and how do we keep the building safe? And at this point, we have no one in the building, so we're not as concerned about it. But at some point, we'll be gathered back together. I know when I was last in Los Angeles, the trails I used to walk with my dog around campus, I can't get to anymore because there's a new fence up. I was very surprised to see a wall.
We are all dealing with that challenge. But I think it's important to remember, even as we do what we need to do about security, that isn't the mission of the institution, right? American Jewish University's mission is not to fence us off so that we don't get attacked. We may, in the service of that mission, have to put up a fence. We did, in fact. But the mission remains giving Jews access to their heritage so that we can contribute to a more vibrant and dynamic world. And that has to remain front and center. How we accomplish that and what needs to be done along the way, those are the secondary tasks to help make sure we get there. But don't lose the goal.
Is there a specific mission that you think that all conservative synagogues share in? Or would you say that would vary by shul to shul?
I would say that both of those are true. Every conservative synagogue is going to have a shared mission that links us to every other. We are all of us convinced that God speaks through human beings, through an evolving literary body that includes Jewish scripture, Torah, Tanakh, the prophets, Mishnah, Talmud, that teaching from this remarkable wellspring of wisdom still and always has a way of fashioning resilient and strong human beings, that a life of halacha and Torah and mitzvot is in fact a way to live better and to sustain a world where the values that we care about can thrive, and that Judaism has always been open to the best influences of the insights of its time. That links all conservative synagogues. But obviously, such a broad mission can be understood differently in the details. And so we have to support each other in the distinctive ways we implement that shared mission.
Great. So our final question, which we're going to be asking each of our guests each week, is there a favorite piece of Torah? What would you like to share with us? Doesn't have to be related to the current climate and everything else going on, but what Torah speaks to you most?
Okay, so I'm sorry, I have to do it again, Louis. I can't tell you which Torah speaks to me most any more than I can tell you what the most important issue is, but I can tell you at the moment the verse that I'm holding out in my head is from the book of Proverbs, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, that we have to build a world through Chesed. And the thing about Chesed that I love is that Chesed, which can be translated love or loving kindness, is not just an emotional orientation. It's not the palpitations of the heart. It's something you do. Chesed is something you demonstrate. It's something you show. When the British were translating the Bible into English under King James supervision, they had to come up with a new word to capture chesed. The English word loving kindness is really taking two English words and hurling them together so that they fuse, right? And I love that. So Olam Chesed Yibaneh, that we are building a world out of loving kindness. That's what's motivating me and getting me. And I try to hold that up as a yardstick to measure my every deed and my every word. Am I advancing loving kindness right now? Am I helping to build a world through loving kindness?
To your pictures.
Beautiful. My final question, I guess, is I have a couple of your books that are sitting here with me right now. For those watching that would like to learn more from you, is there a book you think they should start with, a talk, a podcast? Where can they find more of you if they would like to continue learning?
Thank you. So let me invite your listeners to go onto Facebook, those of you who do. I have a public figure page, www.facebook.com/Rabbi Artson. I have about 66,000 likes. I put up all my talks, all my podcasts. When this comes out, I'll put that up on that page too. So anyone who would like to experience more of it, that's a great place to go.
Great, thank you. I know you don't like saying the most or anything, so I'll edit it in post, but it's fair to say I was your most favorite student of your time.
That is the one exception. You clearly, and I tell everybody that you are my all-time favorite student only because of Spinoza.
I appreciate it, Rabbi. Thank you so much for your time. And everyone, thank you for joining us. And we'll be back together, same time, same place next week with Rabbi Elliot Dorff, another fantastic guest. We're looking forward to it. Thank you again, Rabbi.
Thank you very much, Louis.
If you don't love your neighbor, if you gossip about him, if you never have mercy, if he gets into trouble and you don't try